First things first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Robert McCarthy. I'm the CEO of GOSS. Most of you guys probably know me or seen me at the user groups. If not, we've got a user group coming up soon, so you get a chance to meet me then. Okay, so the topic for today is forms. And basically this webinar today is to give you a quick overview of the iCM 10 forms engine. It's some of its new capabilities that are in the latest release. But this is not necessarily official forms training, because what I'm going to do is cover a whole series of different topics, but at a fairly light level and at a fairly fast-paced level. And the whole idea of it is to give you sort of an indication of what the form is capable of, what some of the things that we think you guys should be doing with forms, but it's not an in-depth training course. So like I say, I'm going to be bouncing around. Some of the bits might be fairly in-depth, some of the bits might be fairly shallow. So let's just sort of position it for you. So what I'm going to cover today is a series of bits. Actually, I was going to quickly spin through some tips for best practice forms creation. I'm going to cover some how to speed up forms creation. Obviously, it's a tedious task, but there are some shortcuts that we can take. I'm going to tell you about the policy change regarding the security around the data browser and the reasons we wanted to do this and the reasons it's important. You guys should know this. I'm going to demonstrate how you can make forms more personal. I'm going to go a quick deep dive into dynamic forms, handlers, and branching. Again, just to show you how you can do that, how simple it is, and hopefully how you can make your forms as simple and as easy as possible. And I'm going to do you a quick sort of preview of workflow, and only a quick preview because really that sort of element can actually be an entire webinar all of its own. So I didn't want to try and rush that. I wanted to try and just show you a quick demo so you can actually get into that later on. Okay, so hopefully most of you now have found that the iCM forms are easy, flexible, and quick to use. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, before we get into this, I just wanted to make sure that, let's say, this isn't an official training. If you do want official training, we have actually a whole collection of courses that break the forms training down into different components. So we have like a half-day basic training, which allows content creators to create simple forms. We have the sort of level 1 training, which will allow you to do multi-page forms, branching, and validation. We've got a level 2 forms training course now, which allows you to do complex validation, conditional fields, having up forms react to real-time events, and even extending forms using different sorts of scripting languages. And we also have a level 3 training, which is basically for developers who want to take forms in a whole new level, whether that's using forms as a toolkit for integration, connecting to workflows or back-end systems, or any sort of deep data integration. So like I say, these are the official courses, and I'm just going to skim through certain app features today, and I'll put this slide up again at the end. The great thing about our forms, obviously, is they're all not just web-ready, but mobile-ready straight off the bat. Please make sure you remember that when you're designing your forms. Don't try and spend a lot of time trying to lay out forms in sort of horizontal grids. It just will not work when you get onto mobile. So always have that in mind when you're looking at your sort of design of your forms. We've actually tried to make the forms designer specifically column orientated, because we think it's bad practice to actually make forms horizontal. So if you're looking for laying out forms in a horizontal fashion, please think about why you're doing it, because we probably believe you shouldn't be. So why have we spent so much time on the forms designer? Basically, a skilled designer can build any type of form. However, a skilled designer is quite expensive and difficult to get a hold of. So what we've tried to do is lower the barrier to entry for forms design. And we think we've done a good job on that. But there's always obviously headroom that you might want if you actually want to push forms further. And what we've tried to do is make sure the forms are capable that if you do want to extend it and you do want to take it to that sort of level, we're not actually getting in your way. And here is the reason we're doing it. It's quicker, lower skill requirement, and obviously that makes it cheaper. But obviously you will have to compromise in certain respects, because what you want to do is you want to try and work with the forms package. And sometimes you might have to rethink the way you want to present stuff. And as I've already said, things like the horizontal layout and the vertical layout may be one of the things that you need to rethink. And because obviously we're trying to package all this up, it's never going to be as completely flexible as a handcrafted form. But however, we think we've left enough sort of connections in there so you can actually do anything you want if you really, really want to. As I mentioned, try and work with the forms package rather than against it. If there's any elements that you are particularly struggling with, then please let us know that, and we can either say, well, yes, we designed it that way because, or thank you for that feedback, we'll actually try and work out how we can make that simpler for you. And as I mentioned already, some requirements will need to be adjusted for that. So the whole point about this is be realistic about your expectations. Have a go at what you think you want to achieve. Let us know if you can't achieve it. Obviously, we're always looking for feedback on the forms and the forms designer, and we want to try and make it as good as possible. So what are forms? Well, here's a selection. Forms can be the front-end website forms. They can look single-page, simple contact forms, or they can be multi-step, complicated forms. Or they could even be forms that you actually fill out as a content contributor. So you have to remember that as well, is the fact that any form that you want to collect, you can actually publish that inside iCM as well if you want, to actually make iCM itself more powerful. So I'm now going to flick through a couple of quick tips about form design, not too long because obviously you guys are probably familiar with these, but I want to sort of show you some of the things that we're thinking about when we actually start designing a form. So the overview of that is there's actually a number of aspects to designing a form. First off, always try and start with your requirements of the form capture. Sometimes people dive into sort of dropping boxes onto a page where actually often you need to look at what the end requirements are before you start. What is the purpose of the form? What is the data that needs to be collected? Because sometimes that's obvious and sometimes that's not so obvious. Sometimes the data isn't actually what you'll present to the user. Always make sure that your forms are sort of intended for the target audience and written that way. We see a lot of jargon and gobbledygook going into forms which really confuse an end user and slow people down when they're entering form because they just don't understand the question. So always try your form out with people who are in your target audience but don't understand the sort of naming conventions of your organization. It's a really good test. From a design point of view, work through an ideal layout. Often you'll actually rejig elements of the form. We've made the form design a drag and drop so you can move entire sections around, you can move entire pages around. Use that. It's a really good way of making sure your data is organized correctly. Again, the ease of use is important. Make sure you're not necessarily trying to put things into horizontal grouping. Make sure that the data flows logically. Always think about accessibility. Not everyone's got a massive screen. Not everyone is necessarily working on a PC. Not everyone's working on a tablet. You've got to make sure that you're taking everyone's considerations into account. And then when you think about the implementation, think about the data that you need to store. Do you actually need to store it? Where are you going to store it? Are you going to send it off into a back-end system? These kind of things are really, really, really important. What are the actual data fields going to be called? If you just put things like line 1, line 2, line 3, if you come along in about a year's time, will you remember what these things are? So try and have consistent naming conventions for all of your field names. It means that anything you do down the track is much, much easier because you'll understand what each field is and what it's for. And only then really do you want to think about your sort of validation implementation. So try and do all of your work first and look at doing the validation sort of almost last because you'll often go through that iteration several times. Then you can start thinking about dynamic behavior as well. So when should I jump to page 1 and 2? When should I hide groups of content? Don't think about that necessarily in the design stage. Think about that in the implementation stage when you're kind of refining your design. So how do you go about helping the users understand the form? Try and avoid large numbers of fields on a page. If that's the case, then breaking up into multiple pages is obviously a very nice way of doing that. So use the pages to split the form into manageable sections or use sections themselves. Don't ask the same information multiple times. We see often a lot of people sort of confirming data that they already know. It's not always the best thing. If you can pre-fill information, then that's obviously the way to go, and I'm going to show you some examples of that later. Neat, consistent forms are obviously much, much easier. Trying grouping stuff together obviously also helps. Sensible validation is obviously part of the key to that. but also make sure you're doing the right error messages. Quite often we see people forget to actually check all their error messages when they're going for a form. Make sure you do that. Flag up mandatory fields, obviously very, very important. Error messages, as I just mentioned it. And testing is massively important. It actually takes a surprisingly long amount of time to test forms once you've actually built them. Sometimes the testing actually takes longer than it does to build the form. We've left some options in the forms designer. When you're looking at a form, sometimes you will think, how should I lay it out? Should I be the labels above? Should I be the labels to the side? Should I be the labels left aligned or right aligned? And as you can see by these last 3 slides, they've all got different sort of advantages and disadvantages. And to be honest, we looked at these 3 problem spaces, and to be fair, we couldn't actually decide what the correct answer is. And a lot of it will depend on the style of your form and the style of your site. So what we actually did is allowed you to select that at a form level whenever you want. So here you quickly see with my form settings, I can just choose the alignment, and it will just relay your form out along that alignment. So don't worry too much about that kind of definition, because we can take care of that. The forms themselves will take care of that all for you. So let's look at some more general tips about the implementation. Make sure you've got a plan. Make sure you know the information to be collected. Try and work out whether you need single or multiple pages from the get-go. You don't always need to know that, but it's obviously useful sometimes as you're sort of expanding your form out. Do you need different views of the data that's going to be submitted? Quite often when we're talking with clients, they will tell us that they need to collect some data, and when they present that data to the back office users or to some other users, you'll often have to lay out different amounts of data to different people. So the first person might just see names and addresses in the original contact point. Somewhere else down the track might actually have to see a lot more data, the exact, I don't know, if there's a dog, for example, and it's bitten somebody, what type of dog? Whereas some viewers of that data won't care, other viewers will. So make sure if you do need to have different views over the data, then that's making clear up front so we can get the data storage correct. Sensible names, which I've already talked about. Grouping related forms together is also very, very important. Within the forms designer now, you can actually create folders, and then you can build all your forms into folders around certain things. So make sure you use that. It's very important. When it comes to test forms, what we've discovered actually is using a forms preview in the designer is probably not worth the effort. What we find when we're designing forms is actually it's best to publish these things. So what you can do is you can create a minimal form, publish it on the site somewhere, but secure that page down. And that means that you can actually try the form out. You can also send it around to other people to try the form out. And then you can just iterate over that form again and again and again and keep publishing it. This is really sort of a powerful way of doing it, rather than you just sitting on your own PC and just trying it out over and over again. But do remember, please, to secure your article, because otherwise people will find it, otherwise people will start filling it out because they won't realize that it's actually not complete yet. When we actually look at designing the forms, one of the things we say is create all the data that you need, create all the pages, put all the fields on there. Don't necessarily think about validation too early on, just get the fields down first. Try and pick the right field types, try and get the right names and the naming conventions. If you can, try and come up with a naming convention within your organization, because that means that if other people are building forms, you'll understand them. Only then, once you've got all your fields ready, you can start adding validation. If you do it too early, you'll often run into sort of validation issues when you're just trying to test a form out, and it will be, oh, sorry, you haven't put a correct email address in. Well, at the moment, I just want to make sure I'm texting all the data correctly. You might not want to have to go through and type a full email address all the time. Try and use the built-in validation options. They're in there for a reason. They will speed up your development no end. Only if you need to, then you can add custom validation functions. And then also you can add things like page level validation. Obviously, you can check field level validation quickly, but often you want to sort of check all the validation of all the fields in one place at the end, and that's page level checking. Only when you've got all that, that's really when you want to start looking at the dynamic behavior, how you move between page 1, page 2, page 3, or page 4. Don't try and get too obsessed with that at the start. And that's also when you can start hiding and showing fields. Again, don't really worry about that too early on in the process. So how do you actually get up and running with a form really, really quickly, we'd recommend using the forms replicator. Here's a form that one of our clients had. As you can see, it didn't even exist on my, it didn't even fit on my PC. So obviously when it looked on a mobile, it was even worse. And obviously we wanted to reuse that form. It would have taken us a while to reset up. But what we actually did was we went to the form and we cut and paste that into iCM in a single button. You can see on the left there, there's the import form from HTML. I can quickly demonstrate this. Oh, so the other thing is, once I've actually pasted that form into ICM, because it's actually been published in ICM, the layout is all taken care of. There isn't any fields off to the right. It's all in a single column, and obviously then, therefore, it will work on your phones as well. So it's really important that it can actually help you move your forms from a non-responsive into a fully responsive layout. Internally, we call it the form stealer. Other people have called it the best practice sharing tool, where you can see a form and you can reuse it effectively. If you want me to do a quick demonstration, I can do that now. So here's a form that one of our clients has had. This is not an ICM form. I'm just going to flip to this form if I can. Let me just flip here. So here's the form. I hope you guys can see that. It's got all the relevant input boxes. It's got some nice drop-down lists. It's got some massive drop-down lists as well. And basically, I want to replicate this in ICM. If I was to sit here and do this, it might take me an hour or two to put all that in. What I'm actually going to do is just go in here, select all of this, copy it, go back into ICM, import from HTML, paste it, OK that, and there's my form. About you, title, it's all there. If I go down to the input categories, that big long list that I showed you, let me just move that out of the way so I can see. Groups options, open it up. Here you go. Here's all the data coming straight across. Yeah, really, really simple, really, really powerful. Gets you up and running very, very, very quickly. It won't bring everything across from the form. You'll still need to sort of obviously retrofit certain aspects. Here's a great example. We've obviously got the capture down here. ICM doesn't really know what that is. So it's actually put a text area basic. Actually, that's wrong. So we can quickly change that now. We can click on this. Again, this is a new thing in ICM 10.0, I think it's 10.01 or 10.02, where you can dynamically change the input control. So actually, this was a capture. There it is, input recapture. I've now changed that. It's now turned that into a recapture control for me. Very, very quick, very, very simple. Other things that I might want to check out, so you can quite clearly see we've actually got the relevant required settings. The title is required. That's great. That's all done. But I might want to add additional validation, for example. Not a problem. I can go and do that. The other thing I might want to do is I might want to rename the field names, for example. Their naming convention might be a bit messy. I might want to standardize them. I've still got the ability to go in and do that. So hopefully that's showing you how I can get forms into this data project or into ICM really, really quickly. So if you've got lots and lots of forms built on other forms packages, or that you see a form that you like on another site, feel free to borrow it. Okay, let's whiz back to the presentation. Okay, just quickly talk through some of the things that are in the latest release. Basically, we've made some improvements in the visual scripting editor. This allows you to build some really complex logic by just clicking some blocks together. I can give you a quick demonstration of that if you want. Feel free to type into the chat window to say yes, you'd be really interested in seeing that if you want. I'll show you some of the bits as we go. We've introduced a thing called the API server. This kind of sounds like magic, but it isn't. Basically, it means that all of the forms now get rendered in this magical container. And it means that it doesn't matter, from our point of view, if our clients are on .NET, Java, CF, or whatever. It means all the forms that you guys can create, you can share with one another. And all the script that you might need to write will all be in JavaScript, which means that, again, they're all exportable between all of our clients. So if somebody writes the world's best form on something, it means that all of our clients can share that form amongst one another. We've also introduced the workflow engine, and this allows you to basically control activities that are beyond the form. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other latest things that we've done in forms is we've got a brand new forms family. Now, it probably won't mean much to many of you, but basically the form family are all the field components that you want to drag onto your forms. And what we've done a massive overhaul on this, which means all the field components, so whether it's a recapture, whether it's a postcode lookup, whether it's a map, they've all been completely rewritten. They use the latest jQuery, so they're all fully dynamic, fully responsive. They'll often use the jQuery UI again, so they work on all touch devices. And it means that all of these things are fully dynamic, which means they can all communicate with one another. So if one of the input fields changes, all of the other fields can be aware of that, and they can react too. And I'll demonstrate that as we go through the next part of the presentation. I did mention that one of the other things that we've done is we've made a little change to the forms data browser. Now some of you are using the forms data browser, some of you might not be. Obviously when you put a form up on your site, you might just want to email that data to somebody. That's not a problem at all. Drag on the action to send that via email. It will go to whoever you define as the email recipient. But the other thing that you can do is obviously you can drag on a save this data. Now by definition, ICM will save that data in ICM. You don't have to worry about building databases. It will just save it all for you. That's really great because in a month, maybe you might want to come back and say, hey, who filled out this form? You go to the form data browser, you can look at all the data and it's all there. It's also useful if emails go missing. We've had reports in the past where clients have used an email form, but because somebody was on holiday, they weren't able to get access to these forms that were being filled out. Well, it's not a problem because they also saved all that data to ICM, which means they could go into ICM and see all the forms as they were being filled out. Now, as the forms capability has got stronger and as what people's uses of the forms are much more interesting, one of the things that we've had to look at is the forms data browser. Now, historically, all the data was by default accessible by anybody in the forms data browser. But obviously now some of you are building some very, very interesting forms and the data is becoming much, much more sensitive. So what we've actually had to do is change the default behavior of the forms data browser. So now if you create a form, then you will be given access to that data. Nobody else in ICM will. So you have to explicitly give access to that data to somebody else if you want somebody else to see it. Okay? It's a small little change, but it has fundamental repercussions because it means that any sort of forms that you create, you know the data is secure in ICM and you have to give people access to it in order for them to see it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the personal forms. How can you personalize forms to end users? And again, this is all about making forms that are easier to use. So this is an example of the My Account feature. Here you can see I've come to My Account. It has no idea who I am, so it's just doing a general welcome. It's saying, in order for you to best experience the My Account, you should log in. And here's a bit of textual blurb to say if you don't have an account, you can still fill our forms in. That's not a problem. You can use the forms anonymously, but you'll have a much better experience if you've got an account. So hey, why don't you sign up? If I don't have an account and I just fill these forms in anonymously, not a problem. Here's my form. I will just have to type everything in. If I do have an account, I've come back to the same screen and it's now welcomed me back. Hello, Robert. Great, knows who I am. Hasn't bothered telling me about the blurb about signing up because I know I'm already signed up. And now when I click through to one of my forms, it's already filled all my data out for me. You know, if I want to change things, I can, but it means I can spin through these forms much, much, much quicker. So how did we do that? Basically, in ICM 1002, we have a new field type. This field type is just called Load User Profile, which means that any of your users who have a user profile in ICM, we can just load it into the form. And we can then default any of the fields in the form to that data. So here you can see I've dragged on Load User Profile, and what I'm going to do now is click on the fields and set up a default value for any of the fields. So in this case, I've clicked first name, and I've picked up the default value, and all I've done differently here is set up the default to say get the default value from the user profile.contact.name.firstname. Now, the reason that the user profile has got all these dots in is because the user profile can be a big collection of data. It's a big structure of data. It will have names, it can have addresses, it could have postcodes, it even could have data about your council tax references. So what we've actually done is put in a dot notation so you can actually build complicated structures in the user profile if you need to. Now, this little function here, as you can read, it says if the current value. So what it's saying is if I've already got a value, if this form's like on a multi-page form and I've come back to it, then it's saying if I've got a current value, then keep the current value. So the defaulting it from the user profile will only do that if I've not already filled this field in. So, and the forms designer will actually build that little structure for you. You don't have to worry about it. All I did was modify the else command there to say, hey, if I haven't got a value, then get it from the user profile. I hope that kind of makes sense. And then by doing that, as you can quite clearly see, it's filled in all the user profile details for me. The other thing about that is it allows you to change and choose any particular form that you want, or any particular field that you want on the form as the one that you want to default. So it's really, really useful because we did it this way because you might have fields on there that you don't want to default to their user profile for whatever reason. You might want to confirm their email address, for example, or you might be asking them to fill out an address of where they want something delivered that might not be their home address. So you can specify any particular field that you want to lift from the user profile. It also means that if you've got like a council tax reference, again, you can click on the council tax reference field and then get that out of the user profile if you have that stored in the user profile. So the other thing that I was going to do on this is, this page itself, this welcome back, Robert, how did I do that? Well, actually, this grey block at the top, which says welcome back, Robert, is actually a form. And the only difference is it's a form with no submit button and a form with no input buttons. So I can actually personalize a page without necessarily making you fill a form in. I just wanted to be much more friendly on this page, so I said welcome back, Robert. How did I do that? Basically, I dragged on the user profile. I said, well, get the user profile, get the first name from the user profile, and then spit that out onto the page. So as you can see at the top, it says welcome back, first name. Here you will find blah. The second part of the form is the anonymous bit. I don't know who you are. And all I do is in the conditional displays is say, if I know who you are, show the first field. If I don't know who you are, show the second field. So if I know who you are, I welcome you back as Robert. If I don't know who you are, I'll say welcome back. Why don't you log in? Why don't you get a user profile set up, an account? So it's very, very simple. I've actually built this my account function just by using the form. And here you can see welcome back, Robert. Here you can see, don't know who you are, so I'm just saying welcome. I'll display some buttons to take me to my my registration pages. So that's how we do personalized forms. Hopefully that was clear, and hopefully you can make some interesting use out of that. We've already developed an awful lot of applications where we're using that sort of the My Account facility. I'm sure you guys will be using it soon. I'll be interested in anybody that says not using a personalized form or going to be using a personalized form in the future. Why they wouldn't be? If you want to do that in the chat, that would be very interesting to me, because personally I think that if you can pre-fill out a whole bunch of fields in a form, then you really should be doing that. It's really what powers the whole channel shift agenda, if you make things easier. Also means people don't make mistakes, which is another big thing. The next thing I'm going to talk about is dynamic forms. Dynamic forms are really powerful. We're trying to make them simple. The thing about dynamic forms is that you can actually incorporate some really complicated logic. You don't have to do dynamic forms. But if you do, we want to make sure that we can make it as easy as possible, but also make it as powerful as possible. Now, the dynamism from a form comes from many different places. It can be in the initialization, and the initialization will happen in 3 different places. The form itself will initialize, will start up. Each page will initialize when you get to that page, and each field will initialize when you get to that field. And you can do different logic at different things. So what I showed you with the personalized forms was pretty much us just changing the field initialization and saying, hey, when you start up, if I've got a user, I'm going to tell you what your default value should be. And very, very quickly, I was able to show you that you can personalize a form. The second stage I showed you, where I was showing you different areas of the page, one that when you're logged in and one that when you weren't, that's basically the page initialization, and I was hiding and showing different blocks of content. The other thing that we can do within the dynamic forms is we have a thing called events and event handlers. And event handlers happen when field and values on the form changes in real time. And that can be very, very powerful as well. If you click on something from a drop-down list, you might instantly want to change something on the form. I'm going to show you how to do that. You can also, in the dynamic forms, obviously the validations themselves, you can do dynamic elements when you're actually validating values. So you can do as you type field validation, for example. And finally, we'll move on to the wizard buttons. And basically, this is all about how you do branching and how we've tried to simplify that whole branching concept. So let's look at dynamic forms about the initialization of a page. So here's, basically this is a 2-step form. Somebody else has already filled a form in. It's come to me for an approval. In this case, I need to collect something. So they've asked me to pick something up, in this case a bulky waste. Now, if I was going to say, yes, I'm going to approve that for collection, I get to specify a date and time. If I need more information, there is no need for me to actually ask for a date and time, because I'm not going to collect it yet because I don't know what it is. So here what you're seeing is by me changing that top list, I'm actually hiding some of the fields on the page. Well, how did I do that? Well, basically that first field is called client status. It's the last part of this big if query. So basically if the client status equals request approved, then I show the collection info. If it doesn't equal request approved, I hide the collection info. It's as simple as that. I could just build up this little logic with these little building blocks, and I can immediately create some sort of dynamic logic. Oops, let me get focus back. So request approved, collection date and time appear. Oh, sorry, yeah. So that's how I do it at the start. If I wanted to do it dynamically as the page itself changes, then I create what's called an event handler. And you can see it's the same logic. Basically, if the value is request approved, I will show and hide the fields. The difference for this block is it's actually built in a handler. And what I said is that if the event is field changed, then I need to rerun this logic. Now, this sounds quite confusing when I'm sort of showing you just the areas, but let me just show you how it works in the form itself. So I'm just going to dive into this demonstration. Let me just cancel that form creation. I'm just going to dive into the approval form in this case. Okay, here we go. And down the bottom here, this is where my approval happens. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to dynamically react to the change of this status. So I click on the status that I want to react to, and on the right-hand side here, you can see handlers. If I click on that, I pop up this logic box. This logic is actually already built for me. The only bit I've actually dragged on is this logic that I showed you earlier. And this logic, if I was just to throw this away, I could just recreate this from scratch. So let me just throw that in the bin. So all I'm doing is my logic is an if statement. If something, do something else. Yeah. And what I would then do is just build up the logic. So the fields, for example, I would want to show something if something happens. I want to, or else I want to hide some other fields. Does that make sense? The field that I want is the value. I just got the variables. So if the value equals something, so I need some logic here. Does the value equal some text? Let's drag some text on. What text should it equal? You know, hello. So if the text equals hello, I will show field. Which field do I need to show? Click on that. Pick the field that you want to show. It's down here. In this case, it was the comments or the collection info. Let's show the collection info. Otherwise, I want to hide the collection info. Select that, drag down, collection info. Job done. So I've actually built up some complicated logic there. I said if the value of this equals hello, show, otherwise hide. I've done it by dragging these components on, and these components just naturally click together and combine some very, very complicated logic, but hopefully in a sort of simple way. And the good thing about this is you can make it as complicated or as simplistic as you want. Okay, let me just flip back to the presentation. Oops, wrong one. 59. Here's an event handler, pretty much the same, which is basically saying on this confirm email, so if the confirm email is correct, what I might want to do is say, is the confirm email the same as the original email? If it is, then I pass a validation. If it's not, I fail the validation. So that's some sort of dynamic field validation depending on other fields. Again, quite a complex validation process, but I've used the same logic. I've dragged on an if. If the value equals another field, then it's good. If it doesn't equal another field, then it's bad. Again, it's building up complicated logic in the dynamic form. Quickly move on to branching forms. It's a very similar technique, branching forms. This is a common use case that we see. Somebody comes to the form, something gets happened on page 1. One of the fields on page 1 will actually determine which of the next form pages that they actually want to fill in. Once they've completed, they will then move to like a thank you or final page. Very, very common use case. So what I'm going to do is quickly show you how that can be done. Here you can see a form that actually has that. So the details page is page 1. We work out what sort of thing that you want to tell us about. We've created pages for complaints, thanks, other, and final. So page 1 is the details. Complaints, thanks, and other are one of the 3 pages you might want to end up on, and then final being the last page, which could be the thank you page. I think we're broadcasting okay. Can people let me know in the chat if they can see the presentation again? We can see it here. Okay, yeah, all right, good stuff. So if you're not seeing it, you might want to reconnect, but yeah, everyone seems to be seeing it, good stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is fill out page 1 and then do something dynamic. So if I just wanted to go to the details page and then go straight to the final page and completely bypass complaint, thanks, and other, I'd click on the next button because the next button is a wizard button, and that's basically where all of the branching happens. It's in the wizard button. And the only thing the wizard button is interested in is what's the name of the next page or what's the name of the previous page. In this case, the wizard button knows by magic that it's the first page, so it won't put a previous on there. And all it wants you to do is tell it what it should be next. If you don't specify anything, it will just move to the next page in its list. So it will move to complaint. But here what I've told it to do is to say, don't go to complaint, go to final. It will then, on the click of the next button, it will go to the final page. But what we want to do here is we want to actually choose what page to go to. So what we've done is we've created a field called action. We've given it some values, complaint, thanks, other. Luckily, that's the same name as our page names. So what we're going to do now is to say, hey, wizard button, the next page you need to go to is the value of the requested page. So the slightly complicated bit here is the fact that on the page, the end user is seeing the word action, whereas actually the field itself is called requested page. That's probably a bad example in my case. What I could have done is called that field action, in which case it would have been action down the bottom as well. And that's what I'm saying about sometimes make sure your naming convention is correct, because I clearly haven't followed it here. But what this I'm showing you, what happens now is the fact that if I change that action will get passed through to the wizard button. So I pick thanks, the next button, the next page it will go to will be the thanks page. If I pick something else, it will go to that something else page. I'm going to quickly spin through now, and like I say, it's a very, very quick look at workflow. And this is what I mentioned is pretty much the detail that's after the form. So with the forms, you can respond to the user really quickly. You can dynamically react to what the forms, what the user's putting in. But quite often there'll be something that goes on once the form is submitted. And basically you cannot do that in the form because the form has done its job and it has finished. So what you actually want to do is some sort of workflow after the fact. One of the things that we've discovered is because ICM can give you beautiful looking forms and your website is great looking, way more people will fill those forms in. We're seeing that all the time, that the uptake in the forms is, every time people have started using ICM forms, the uptake in forms has leaped dramatically, which is really, really good news. The problem is if your integration is just literally, hey, we're going to send an email after we've filled this form in, strangely enough, you're going to get bombarded with emails. Yeah, and because the form is great and because the website's great, they expect a great level of service, almost Amazon-like. So if you don't respond to these forms quickly, the next thing it's going to do is say, hey, I filled this form in on your website and I've not had a response. Can you tell me what's going on? So very, very quickly you'll get bombarded with phone calls. So what you want to try and do is you actually want to automate and accelerate the process that sits behind the form. And this is where the integration component or the process bit component comes in next. Now, we've already been around a lot of our clients and we've seen they've actually started to use process diagrams to actually lay out what's going to happen behind the form. You know, this form will go to Bill, Bill will approve it, and it will go to Joe. Joe might then send Thomas to go and do something else. And people have already started diagramming them, these processes, and they started to use video or post notes, which is great, but it's not usable. And what we want you guys to try and do is actually create some usable processes that you can actually really, really use. So what we've done is introduced, we've given away a free BPMN diagramming tool. So if you are going to draw these processes, please try and draw them using this tool, because it means that you can actually reuse this stuff. Because if you use this tool to draw a process, you can actually enable this process in real time. And here's a real example. This is a bulky waste collection. The process starts at the top, which is just off the screen, but you can see the very first thing it does is send an acknowledgement email. It then flows through. Somebody reviews it. If it's not got enough information, then you can send a more info email. If the person supplies some more requested information, people will then review it, and it basically sits in this process working through until it's complete. And the great thing about these processes is that in ICM now you can actually upload this workflow and it becomes a real life working thing. It isn't just a, hey, somebody will fill it in, somebody will get an email, and then we'll have to manage all that via email. We actually manage it for you in ICM. So how does that actually work from an end user point of view? Well, here's a real life sample. Basically, these guys are looking at a form that's been created in ICM. Whoops. Let me just close up. So these guys are looking at a form that's been created in ICM. They fill it out. They hit submit. That information immediately goes to a council worker for approval. They look at another form in ICM because they are told that there's another thing to do. They click on it, they look at the form details in ICM, they approve it, or they send it back for more information. the citizen gets immediately updated about what's going on. They immediately get told that the council employees looked at it and the council employee said something specific, yes or not. So they don't have to phone you up. They immediately can see what's going on. Because this particular thing has been approved, it moves on to the next person. This next person could be out and about on their mobile phone, and in this case, they say, hey, we've got some bulky waste for you to collect. He scrolls down, looks at the job, views the details by using another form, and he can say, yeah, I can collect that. And again, immediately the citizen informed that the council workers looked at the job and agreed they're going to collect at such and such a date. They won't be phoning you up, but they won't be contacting you. Once he's actually done the job, he will click on it and say, hey, yes, I've completed this job. Again, he will use an iCM form, because the iCM form will give him the details of where the bulky waste has to be picked up from. It will even show him a Google map showing you where he has to collect it from. And once he's collected it, he will fill out an iCM form and say, yeah, got that, click, done, citizen's updated. All that information is then collated in a list for the citizen. And again, the council employee then will be able to look at a dashboard to see that his process has been updated. Yeah. Now, I'm whizzing through this quite quickly, but this is the sort of thing we're going to cover in a complete separate webinar. But this is the sort of thing that we think you can do with the forms and the workflow. Binding these two together gives you a very, very, very powerful platform to build on top of. Okay, so that's kind of it, really. I've given you a very, very quick demonstration of the sort of the power of the business process mapping tool. We've actually got another webinar scheduled on the 25th of March. Please go onto the website and book in. It will show you basically the power of the tool, why you should be using it, what you should be thinking about, and how you go about getting started. We think it's a really, really, really powerful tool to automate back-end systems or back-end processes, or even use it as a tool to sort of coordinate an existing back-end system. So please feel free to get in and have a look at that and let us know what you think about it. And finally, just a quick reminder of the different levels of training that you can sign up to. So again, feel free to go online and book that. There's a page there that you can click through to and book yourself into courses, or if not, talk to your account manager about setting that up for you. Otherwise, thanks guys. I know we're pretty close to time, but if there is any questions, I've got a couple of minutes, I believe, to quickly spin through them.
There's a couple of questions that would be useful to share. Change the format of the emails that are sent. This is the auto-generated emails, because the current version is very messy. Do you know?
Yeah, the email action has been enhanced in the latest release, but it is still pretty much a fixed format. However, if you use the BPM workflow tool, you can actually build a workflow that can send multiple different emails in multiple different formats. So if you do want to customize the email, then we probably recommend you building a workflow that actually does the email sending. One, because it's not relying on the form. Basically, the emails get sent after the form is submitted, and it allows you to send multiple emails to multiple different people and contain different data in each of the emails that's sent. And you can even put logic in there to say, if this, then send that email, if that, then send that email. So if you want to do that, we prefer to put that into the workflow that happens after the form.
Great. There was one other which answered directly, but I think everyone would be quite like to hear, which is about the field IDs. So when you're looking in the data browser and exporting data to Excel, the naming of the columns, I think it used to be in form IDs, but is now in the field label.
Yes.
That's correct, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. I had a check on the GOSS site, and that's how it looks on the GOSS site. So we're on 10.02, so that's a yes for those questions.